Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to EduSat Live Lectures. Dear friends, today in Indian Political Thought, we will be talking about the political ideas of Kabir. To discuss this topic, we have with us our subject expert, Dr. Manindranath Thakur. Dr. Thakur is Associate Professor in Center for Political Studies, School of Social Sciences, JNU. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Sir to our studios and request him to start the lecture. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. What I'll do today, I'll talk about Kabir's political ideas. Normally, Kabir has been seen as a poet and at best as a philosopher, but hardly as a political philosopher. So that will be our main concern, that why should a student of political science or political theory or political philosophy read Kabir, and how one should read Kabir as a political philosopher. That will be our main concern. Let me first try to locate Kabir in the Asian philosophical tradition. Asia, as we know, is a birthplace of many religions, and it has huge tradition of dialogues on issues related to what we traditionally call religion or metaphysics. And there have been a lot of churning that took place. Several religions have emerged in Asia, several philosophical traditions have emerged in Asia, and there are certain common concerns that they all have, and we can easily say that there is something called Asian philosophy, and we can also easily say that Kabir belongs to that tradition of Asian philosophy. We know that there is a problem when we argue or we assert that there is something called Asian philosophy, because mostly what we know as religion, most of the experts would reduce these philosophies to religion and would say that these were not philosophies but religions. I think we should look at these religions not as merely faith system, which of course it is, they are, but also as philosophical systems. Faith is only part of its being. One can also treat them as identities, but despite the fact that there are identities created around religion, I think religions are also knowledge traditions evolved in different parts of the world, and many of them have evolved in Asian societies. So Asian societies have a very, very different understanding of what does religion mean, and a tradition which Kabir belongs to has been to assert that religion does not mean identity, religion does not mean institutions, religion doesn't mean rituals, religion doesn't mean very conservative thinking about how to live, but religion basically means broadening the horizon of thinking, the spirituality, the connectivity between human beings and the universe. The abstract notion of being has deep linkages with what is religion according to these Asian philosophers. And we have several traditions in Asia which assert these kind of things. Mostly even religious traditions do have certain streams asserting this, be it Hinduism or Islam or Christianity or Buddhism. But also there are streams on the margins, very difficult to call them belonging to one particular religion, but touching upon various religions together, and that is the set of ideas which can be called as this tradition of sometimes Sufism, sometimes Bhakti, sometimes Tantra. Sufism is more tilted towards Islam, but it is not Islam in a very conservative sense. Bhakti is tilted towards Hinduism, but not Hinduism in a traditional sense. Similarly, Tantra seems to be much more powerful and much more influential in terms of social relations, but it can't be called Hinduism. It has close link to, but it also touches upon Islam or Muslim communities. So there is a kind of set of ideas which do not belong to religion, and yet they belong to religion. I think Kabir belongs to that tradition. Let me make another point about this, that Asian traditions, since there have been what Amartya Sen calls the argumentative traditions in Asia, these Asian traditions have engaged among each other and innovated new traditions out of that according to the needs of changing times, and also according to the intellectual need of the debate. And it seems that in different centuries you have many such traditions emerging, but at least one dominant tradition emerging in every century. And we can look at the history of India right from what you call Upanishad tradition to Buddhism to Gorakh Panth to Rumi, Kabir, Nanak, Meera, all kinds of thinkers all around. Gorakhnath was early 11th century, Rumi was 13th century in Afghanistan, Kabir 14th, 15th century, Nanak 15th, 16th century, Mirabai again 15th, 16th century. So you have always a middle ground of thought processes. I think these were the innovations after huge debate between different so-called mainstream religious traditions, and they were looking for new grounds for engagement and negotiations. This is the tradition to which Kabir belongs. I will argue that this is the tradition of also political philosophy, and I will argue that this is a tradition of political philosophy of politics of unconditional love. That is something many of the contemporary philosophers are arguing. For instance, a famous critical realist philosopher Roy Bhaskar, who is a philosopher of science, also says that if you want to save the humanity, you have to really look for politics of unconditional love. Or scientists like Stephen Hawking suggests that the way humanity has developed instruments of mass killing, if we don't reorganize our politics in a way that we don't start killing each other, thinking to kill each other, we will be destroyed as humanity. So it seems these philosophers are extremely important, as they do not belong to any dominant traditions, but they are carving out space for politics of unconditional love, and therefore they are political philosophers. We have to reclaim them as political philosophers. Let me take a few examples. What Rumi suggests. Rumi says, stop acting so small. You are universe in ecstatic motion. So Rumi suggests that you as individual, as human being, is a part of the universe's motion, and therefore you must think of yourself as part of the universe, not merely as part of a given time and space in which you are born and you are living at the moment. So you must broaden your vision to become a universal thinker, you must understand that you belong to human species. And that notion that human species in the universe, being in the world in Heideggerian sense, is extremely important for you. Similarly, he says, if you are irritated by smaller rubs, how your mirror will be polished? Yani, when you are in trouble, you must see the trouble as if you are being purified, as if you are given a chance to realize yourself as part of the universe. And once you realize yourself as part of the universe, you will see your own picture very clearly. Means you will realize yourself, you will witness yourself. This witnessing yourself is a core idea, or what you call accessing yourself is a core idea of this philosophical tradition. When you access yourself and then you start looking at the world, your vision towards the world will change, your attitude towards nature will change, your attitude towards other human beings would change. That is the political aspect of this kind of thinking. Take for example Kabir. He also talks of the sound of the inner world, and he says, music without words means leaving behind the mind, and leaving behind the mind is meditation, and meditation returns you to the source, and the source of all is sound. So it is again like Rumi, Kabir is suggesting that you have to access yourself, the sound that is coming from within, the inner sound, and that would allow you to realize yourself, and that would transform your vision towards the world, that will transform also your relation with other human beings. And you will not believe in hierarchies, and you will not believe in superiority or inferiority of human beings. You will bleed when you see somebody in trouble, not only human beings, but any living beings. You will have empathy. Remember what Buddha used to argue, that your being human can only be justified if you have empathy for all living beings. This is a tradition which I think very live tradition in India and Asia, and this tradition has a vision of politics. That's the point I want to bring home, that this is not only metaphysics, this is not only something talking about the spiritualism and some superhuman characters of human beings. I think it is talking about hardcore politics, transforming the politics, the way we are managing ourselves. And Kabir suggests, let me quote him again, if you want the truth, I will tell you the truth. Friend, listen, the God whom I love is inside me. That is the point, that the universe is inside you, and once you start meditating on that, you will realize that you are part of the universe. And if you realize that you are part of the universe, then you realize yourself, and if you realize yourself, you will transform. That transformation is very important. Very important for transforming the social relationship also. This is something that the philosophers of liberation in the West probably have missed. They have been talking about reorganizing the social relationships, but they have not argued for, most of them, or at least they have not been interpreted as if they are saying that to transform the outer world, you need to transform the inner world too. That, I think, is the core idea of this tradition. Take, for instance, Nanak. He says, Nanak naam jahaj hai, chadhe so utre par. Now, what is this naam? Naam is accessing the self. the way to access the self for Nanak is taking Naam, the Naam of the Vaheguru. So, if you do that, gradually you realize the inner self, you meditate, that is a meditation for Nanak. So, you meditate on yourself, you meditate on the name, and that is how you meditate on yourself. And if you meditate on yourself, then you realize that you are part of the universe. That will take you to the other side of the world, other side of the existence, where you will transcend the time and space in which you are existing and realize that you are part of the species being. And if you realize that you are the part of the species being, you will have empathy, you will have sympathy, you will have love, you will have affection, and that is unconditional politics of unconditional love. So, this is the tradition to which Kabir belongs. Let me bring another point to you, that is the relation between literature and philosophy. One of the problems that we have seen in our academic world is that we do not consider literature as legitimate form of doing philosophy. So, what we do is, when we read philosophers, we only read formal philosophers, and these people like Kabir and Nanak and Rumi are at best treated as poets, or they are treated as religious gurus or religious figures. They are not treated as philosophers. I would like to assert and suggest that poetry is merely a form of expression of their philosophy. There could be a prose, there could be very argumentative way of expressing your philosophy, but there could be very poetic way of expressing your philosophy. And I think when they were writing, and they were not writing within the formal institutional structure of university, with dedicated set of people who would study them, who would read them, who would argue about that, who will write on them, but they were doing at a very, very popular level. When they were doing it at the popular level, obviously they had to do in a popular way. And what was the popular way? That people can sing, can dance on that. Singing was a very important way of communication. So, it was not that somebody would stand up and read the poetry of Kabir or read the poetry of Nanak. In fact, this poetry used to be communicated to the people through singing, group singings. Groups were moving here and there, and they would sing this song, and people would listen to those songs and would directly access themselves through that. It was so appealing. It was not alienating. The language was simple. The language was language of the people, concerns of the people, solving problems of everyday life, raising issues of humanity, and directly touching the heart of the people. Literature has great strength in terms of communicating widely to the people. That was the reason that Gandhi requested many writers to write novels and stories and poetry during the freedom struggle, to communicate the ideas of the freedom struggle. In fact, some people approached Gandhi and told him that, look, what to do? I can't write in Hindi, which is people's language. Gandhi said, forget about the language. You write the way you want, use the medium you want and the form you want, but keep on writing on this. These are more powerful tools to communicate to the people directly the ideas. And you can see this communication through writings of Premchand, through writings of Mulk Raj Anand, through writings of Hazare Prasad Dwivedi or Jayasankar Prasad. Series of writers, they were read every day, being discussed in society much more than the solid books of philosophy. This was the tool through which philosophy travelled, and therefore Kabir and Nanak and Rumi and all, they produced literature, and they produced their philosophy through literature and through vernacular literature. That is another interesting thing. When Tulsidas was approached by the Pandits of Kashi that you must write your Ramcharitmanas in Sanskrit, he said, nothing doing, I won't. Because I do not think that people can read Sanskrit so well. So, I must write in the language in which people can read. So, it is a poetry, the epic written in people's language and full of philosophy. Researchers who have worked on Ramcharitmanas and its connection with society know it better, that a lot of people in everyday life, to solve their problems, so the problems of at the level of ideas, they quote Ramcharitmanas and take a decision. So, that is how philosophy and literature are connected, and particularly in the Asian region, the formal philosophy has not developed that way. It has developed, there was a strong tradition of Brahminical philosophy also, but this tradition was equally strong, where philosophy was articulated through literature and communicated to the people. In this region, you will find knowledge of this kind was quite widespread, and there were traditions of this knowledge. There were people who would say kathas, stories, would interpret these things, would read out these things to the people, very professionals. There were jathas, groups, created mutts around these philosophies, would communicate those philosophies not merely as something very academic outside the practice, but theory and practice going together, bringing those ideas into popular practice. That, I think, is a very strong Asian tradition, and scholars who want to study politics of this region and the way people decide while they vote, the way people make political decisions, will have to engage with this knowledge tradition. That this is the knowledge tradition which actually influences the decision making process of the people in a big way. The another point that I want to bring home is, what was the nature of this tradition? What was the political nature of this tradition? If we call it a bhakti tradition more or less, some people argue that this tradition was a surrender to feudal power. Bhakti was actually, in a way, moving away from the political scenario. It's a fugitive. People did not want to get into controversy, therefore they became Sufist. People did not want to challenge authority directly, therefore they moved towards this kind of happy-go-lucky kind of thing, singing the songs of love, etc. Purushottam Agrawal, who has a very powerful book on Kabir called Akath Kahani Prem Ki, the story of the love which can't be told, he argues that this is not true. In fact, he gives a very counter viewpoint, and he says that this tradition, the tradition I was talking about, is a tradition of revolt against authority. And I can understand this point very well with some examples. Rumi, and Rumi's father probably, was also Sufi saint. And the king once came to him, said that, well, why don't you take my kingdom, because people come to you to solve their problems, they don't come to me. Even Rumi was treated like that. So it means that authority was always treating these people as somebody who had capacity to challenge their authority. Agrawal argues that, in fact, this was a method of interrogation, social interrogation. Kabir and others, they raised several questions in society. They critiqued the social hierarchy, they critiqued the power structure. When Tulsidas was invited to one of the rulers invited him and argued and suggested that he would give him a gift of a village where he can survive very well. He said, I am a chakar of the god, I can't become chakar of any human being. So, all these thinkers were thinkers of revolt. Take Mirabai, revolted against the authority, the feudal authority. So, I would argue, I would agree with Purushottam Agrawal, who thinks that actually this tradition, you call it bhakti or tantra or Sufi or whatever, this tradition was not only different from the dominant conservative traditions, but also very powerful response to the political authority, a popular response to political authority, or a response to political authority from the people's point of view. So, it would argue not only the political authority, it would argue the religious authority, argue against not only the political authority, but also against the dominant religious authorities. This was the tradition in which Kabir belonged to. I think if we want to read Kabir, we have to read from there. If we want to read Kabir, we have to read how Kabir was representing this tradition. In fact, if you look at Kabir's views on religion, it was, one can argue, a viewpoint that suggested that religion was for liberation of human beings, not for control of human beings. Very much anti-modernist perspective on religion. The debate on secularism in India should engage with this kind of thinkers and see what is the tradition of Asia about religion and secularism. And Gandhi is a good example, who talked about Sarvdham Sambhav. And Sarvdham Sambhav is not keeping religions separate from each other, but allowing them to enter into dialogue and critique of each other. That is the point that Kabir would like to bring. The religions need to engage in dialogue and critique of each other and arrive on certain universal elements within religion which is good for humanity. I think that is where Kabir stands with us, and that is where Kabir suggested for being active, not a passive thinker. One can see how Kabir was also a social reformer without really leading a movement probably, but influencing the minds of people, the hegemonic dominance of religions. I think that was the concern, that was the context of this kind of thinking. Thank you. So, let us talk about Kabir's political ideas, and that is the aim of this lecture, that I will try to see how Kabir's ideas have certain political tone and what kind of suggestions Kabir is making about politics. Kabir has become very popular thinker today. Suddenly there is a resurgence of interest in Kabir. There has been always interest in Kabir, but you can see there is some resurgence and interest in Kabir, both at the political and at the academic level. You can see also at the popular level how Kabir's songs are being very popular today, and you can see how scholars are going back to Kabir and reading Kabir more seriously. There is a context of that, of course. The context is that of the religious conflict, contemporary religious conflict worldwide, where the issue of love has become very important. The absence of trust is very important. People are trying to reclaim trust among human beings, as it is being seen that this distrust might kill human being. You have historians like Irfan Habib, Satish Chandra, and great Rahul Sankirtan, who have extensively written on Kabir, who have deep interest in Kabir. You have literary figures like Ram Vilas Sharma, Hazare Prasad Dwivedi, Purushottam Agarwal. They have written on Kabir, various dimensions of Kabir. You have Gail Longwit, a famous thinker who keeps writing about Dalit politics, that how Kabir was in a way anti-caste intellectual. You have also the figure of Ram Mohan Roy, who critiqued Hindu tradition and who was the father of the modern India, who suggested that Kabir was Agradarshak. He was able to see beyond the time and space. You have Ambedkar, who thinks that Kabir was a figure who can be put with Phule and Buddha in the history of, or in the intellectual history of India. So you have variety of thinkings, variety of ideas about Kabir. I am not going to give any survey of what they have been thinking. Rather, I will try to argue that Kabir has something to suggest for the students of politics and also to those who are involved in politics. As a philosopher, Kabir has something to offer to us. Now, let me try to see Kabir's context, or the political context, the context of Kabir's time also. As we know, Kabir was supposed to be very low in the caste hierarchy, and that gave Kabir certain ideas about caste exploitation. This caste of Julaha, the weaver caste, was not treated very well either by Muslims or by Hindus. Probably that was the reason Kabir constantly kept referring to his own location in society, and he was looking at religion, politics, everything from that vantage point. So, it is very interesting to see that Kabir has that vantage point which we sometimes try to get deliberately as political thinker, the vantage point of the marginalized people. Hazare Prasad Dwivedi has conducted a good research to suggest that Kabir's location was a location of the last man almost in society. So, therefore, his philosophy is a philosophy of the last man, thinking from the bottom of society, having experiences of all kinds of humiliation in society. He was able to give critique and he was able to give alternative. That is the strength of Kabir's location. Kabir was also located in a very complex religious context. I do not know if we can historically argue that it was a time of conflict between religions. I am not sure, but I can guess that religious organizations or the conservative forces within religions were becoming stronger, and they were trying to define everything. They were trying to define politics. So, what was being lost was, I think, judgmental rationality. So, everything was being judged from a point of view of religion. So, religion probably at that time was emerging as an identity also, and also as an identity politics, because authority, the power, the political power was not conceived as neutrally above the interest, conflicting interest, but was trying to establish authority of certain sections of society. As a result, the communities were becoming more conservative, trying to organize themselves in order to capture the power, in order to assert its own power. I think that was the context when Kabir was thinking and writing. And he was realizing that this kind of conservative, the growth of conservatism was detrimental for humanity, was detrimental for judgmental rationality, was detrimental for human liberation. Similarly, if you look at Kabir's philosophical location, there was a tradition of Vaishnavism. I am not expert on Vaishnavism, and I am not going into detail of that too, but definitely Vaishnavism was the context in which Kabir was thinking, but he was going beyond that. He was trying to argue that every human being, as they are part of the species being, have capacity to realize themselves and should have possibilities to realize themselves. And that is also going beyond the limits of political authority and the social authorities. And also the political economy of that time, probably that was a time when agrarian society was transforming, and the industry, not exactly industries, but you can say some kind of trade was emerging, and this was creating a lot of transformation in society. So, Kabir was reflecting on all those things. So, this was the context of Kabir. He was a poet of transition, he was a poet of conflict situation, he was a poet of a society which was in crisis. And the crisis was, I do not know if it was an economic crisis also, but definitely a philosophical crisis, a society which was deeply in philosophical crisis. And therefore, Kabir is very important today when we are again in philosophical crisis. And we want to get back to Kabir probably because of that reason. One of the reasons I think that we find Kabir very interesting today is the debate on religion versus secularism. I will focus on this a little more. We have two major perspectives on religion, the modernist perspective and the postmodernist perspective. The modernist perspective suggests that, well, religion is something that will die, that will be over after some time. At least this is what was suggested earlier. And the modern science suggested that there is a conflict between science and religion, and with the growth of science, religion would become completely redundant. So, religion has to be marginalized. But what we saw in last 20, 30, 40 years, that instead of dying, religion has staged a comeback. It has returned. Now, how does the return, how is the return being explained? So, modernity says that probably due to some kind of economic crisis, people are going back to God, people are going back to religion. Postmodernity suggests something different. It suggests that, well, there is something inherent in religion. There is something inherent in religion that is bringing religion back. People are going back to religion because they realized that what modernity suggested about religion, what science asserted about society, nature, is no more viable. There is a problem, big deep problem with that, and realization of that deep problem probably has transformed the situation in a way that we are going back to religion. Whatever it is, we are sure that there is a return of religion, and therefore there is a growing conflict between religions. The return of religion is also in the form of identity politics of religion, much more than the philosophical return of religion. It is a return of religion in the form of identity politics, and therefore there is a big debate about secularism. Whether we are living in a post-secular society, or we are living in a society where secularism is in crisis and probably it can come out from the crisis, or we are living in a society which is seeing secularized religion, a secularized religion where faith in God is not important, but where identity has become more important. So, this is a debate going on, and this debate is deeply connected with what we call the debate on secularism. In India also there is a big debate on secularism, and Indian scholars are suggesting that the Western secularism is about separation between state and religious organizations. That is the main concern of the Western secularism, but in Indian context, since there was no deep connection between state and religion that way, whatever it is in the modern situation, there must be a principal distance between state and religion, but also the real issue for us as we were a multicultural society has been how these religious communities live together peacefully without fighting each other, without struggling for power. That, I think, is a major concern for the scholars on secularism today. Now, this concern has not been actually examined from the point of view of what you call the tradition of philosophy to which Kabir belongs, Sufism, Bhakti and all. I think Kabir has a point to make in this. The point Kabir is making that secularism does not mean killing religion. Instead, secularism would mean reclaiming spiritualism from every religion. So, he gives critique of religion. So, the internal critique of religion is extremely important point that Kabir is making, and he argues that unless we do that, there is no possibility of coexistence. So, he says, he critiques those Maulvis and the Pandits and those temples and the mosques in a big way. So, his critique is not suggesting that religion is useless, it must be thrown out. His critique suggests that there is something essential aspect of religion that needs to be reclaimed, and the conservatism that is growing, which is focusing on the institutional aspect of religion, ritualistic aspect of religion, that has to be countered. So, for him, secularism would not mean distancing religion from state or distancing religion from human life, rather transforming religion in a way or reclaiming religion in a way that becomes useful for human beings. The real aspects of religion, the spiritual aspect of religion has to be reclaimed. That is Kabir's viewpoint. That is a third viewpoint in the secularism debate. The first viewpoint, of course, is that religion should be abolished, should be eliminated, should be banned, and etc. Second viewpoint is that no, it can't be banned, it must be controlled. Third viewpoint is that no, Asian society has seen religion and we can't, the idea of secularism is the Western, etc., etc. I think Kabir's viewpoint is third viewpoint. The viewpoint which Gandhi realized as very important, which Ambedkar realized as very important, and both of them, if you look at their writings, they always have said that religion is very important for society. But then the next sentence is that we have to reclaim religion. Ambedkar suggests there is a principle of religion and there is a law of religion. The principle of religion is the essential aspect of religion. Law is mediated through power. What we have to reclaim is the principle of religion. Or Gandhi suggests in Hind Swaraj that the problem is not that people have become irreligious. Sorry, the problem is not that people have become religious. The problem is that people have become irreligious. When they argue in this way, or when Tagore says that religion is important in his book called Religion and Man, Religion of Man. When Tagore quotes Bowles or Kabir, what these people are arguing is that the tradition to which Kabir belongs is a life tradition, and that tradition has a different viewpoint on the question of religion and secularism. If secularism means how people who are spiritual, they are adopting different means of being spiritual, they can live together. That is what we have, the technology in Asian society, and that is what Kabir is proposing. For Kabir, religion is a means for liberation. And what is liberation? Realizing that you are part of the universe. That's liberation for Kabir or for Nanak, for anybody. So Kabir's argument that you are part of that universe, and how do you realize that you are part of that universe? By being inward, by meditation. Kasturi kundali base mrig dhundhe van mai. The essence of the universe is within you, and that you can access when you access yourself. And once you access yourself, you are a transformed human being. I think it is very close to argue that there is a totalized ontology. Human beings are spiritual beings along with being, physical being. So we are psychological being too, we are a spiritual being too. The more we access that spirituality of ours, the consciousness of ours, the layers of consciousness of ours, the more we become better human beings. That is the argument Kabir suggests. And this is a very realist philosophy of religion. That we are not only physical beings, as being perceived by the modern philosophers, many of them, that we are basically a biological material being, guided by the interest that is emerging out of biology. We are also psychological beings. Human beings are not only rational beings, but they are also emotional beings, very psychological beings. Reclaiming that totalized being of ourselves is Kabir's philosophy. And if you do that, and the technology for doing that is with religion. What Foucault suggests, the technology of the self in the Greek society used to be there, which is no more there. Foucault's argument is that modernity probably has killed that technology. So the technology of that self, accessing the self in Asian society, was with religion. And fortunately, we have not killed religion. Therefore, there is a possibility of reclaiming that religion. So Kabir would argue that if you can reclaim that religion, that would be religion of liberation. Something that liberation theologists are arguing, that give a critique of the contemporary exploitative system, and the critiques would be hardcore critique, and not only a critique, mobilize people against that. To quote Kabir, कबीरा खड़ा बाजार में लिए लुकाठी हाथ जो घर जा रहे आपनो चले हमारे साथ. The Kabir is standing in the public place with a stick, and a stick is not a normal stick, the Sufi stick, which is not a straight stick, and that stick is the symbol of a spiritual power, and he is standing in the public place. People who want to transform society, if they have the guts to burn their houses and come with Kabir, they must join Kabir to transform the society. That is the slogan that Kabir gives, that the appeal that Kabir does. That is the liberation, the religion of liberation. That is the religion of action. I think Kabir argues for that, and there is a huge tradition in India. That is the point I have been making. That Kabir is not only one in this. There is a tradition in India that has been arguing for connecting spiritualism with political power, with political action, to challenge the political power. And that is possible. And then if we do that, and that's the argument that he brings, that then probably the communities following different paths of liberation can easily live together. Why we have trouble in living together? Because instead of reclaiming that aspect of religion, we are only treating religion as institutions and as source of our identity. So Kabir's argument as a philosopher of liberation is this argument. There is another point that Kabir is making, and that's a very relevant point for contemporary political thinkers in India. I'm particularly saying the post-colonial thinkers. See, what's happening in India today is, and that is Kabir's appeal, that you should never do that, that we are in a master-slave relationship. We are looking at looking at ourselves with philosophies emerged somewhere else. There is no harm in appropriating things from anywhere in the world if that helps you in understanding yourself. The problem is that the link between being, thinking and knowing gets disjointed. Kabir philosophizes his being, he thinks about his being, and he treats that thinking as knowledge. That is the method of philosophizing, Kabir's method of philosophizing. He talks about mundane things, what he does every day, and that's where the philosophy begins, and that's how he philosophizes everything, and he reaches to a very complex philosophy. The scholars and the philosophers in the third world, in the post-colonial world, probably have missed this point, that we have to philosophize our being, and that philosophizing is knowing, and that knowing is transformative, that can transform our society. That, I think, can take us beyond this master-slave relationship. That is a Swaraj in ideas, what Gandhi or K.C. Bhattacharya used to argue. So Kabir is a philosopher of Swaraj in ideas, and that Swaraj in idea definitely has to be liberative, as we will be theorizing and philosophizing the problems, the structures of domination that we are facing. Therefore, Kabir has developed huge critique of the caste system. Kabir has developed critique of religion. Kabir has developed critique of authority. Kabir has developed critique of all kinds of structures of domination that he was facing at the time. So, if we agree with this, then I think it's easy to move to the next point, and I want to bring this point back, that how Kabir was a philosopher of politics of unconditional love, which I think is the cry for time, the demand of our time. For Kabir, love is the key to humanity. As we all know, he said that no matter how many books you have read, unless you read these 2.5 letters of love, that is the prem. Let me quote in Hindi. पोथी पढ़ी पढ़ी जग मुआ पंडित भया न कोई ढाई आखर प्रेम का पढ़े सु पंडित होय. So who is knowledgeable? What is knowledge? Knowledge is only the fact that you know how to love. The technology of the love, technology of unconditional love is really knowledge, and you love everybody. That is the core idea. That's the core idea of Kabir's philosophy. Thank you, Amita.
Okay, on that note, I would like to thank sir for this very enriching discussion, and I would like to thank you, dear friends, for watching our show, and I hope you have been enlightened and enriched with this discussion about political ideas of Kabir. On that note, thank you, dear friends, for watching our show. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.